We will get this underway because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I certainly appreciate the turnout, and I appreciate everyone being here today. Some of you, I'm sure, have come from great distances. I know some of our speakers have as well, or our presenters. And so we will get underway. We'll get the agenda going. The goal is to finish up as close to 6 o'clock as possible. Now, I've done these kinds of things all over the state, whether it's on this topic or others, and usually you go a little over. But that's okay. But if we go a little over and we end at 6:30, that's better than ending at 8 o'clock or 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I'm sure, for many of you here. So with that, I want to introduce, I am Senator Rob Ort. So for those who do not know, I'm a New York State Senator. I represent the 62nd Senate District, which is comprised of Niagara County, Orleans County, and 2 towns, Ogden and Sweden, in Monroe County. So basically right between Rochester and Buffalo is my district. Obviously, I've had, well, I shouldn't say obviously, I've had a number of projects that have been Article 10 projects. I've been in the Senate for just under 5 years, and in that time I think I've had 5, or have currently 5 projects that are either at some progress in the Article 10 process. And obviously, when you talk about windmills, most of those projects fall under Article 10. And for those that don't know, I'm sure that will come up today. Article 10 is a New York State process whereby over a certain amount of energy production, projects have to go through the Article 10 process, which is a statewide board that makes determinations on whether these projects should go forward. And to my knowledge, there's only been 2 that have gone completely through the Article 10 process. There's been several other projects that have started, stopped. Some projects are currently in the Article 10 process currently. But obviously, we're here today to talk about the public health impacts as it is related to windmills. And I wanted to just address briefly, this past session in the New York State Legislature, we passed the Climate Community and Protection Act. I'm sure most of you in this room at least are familiar with that, I hope, but there's a lot of folks across New York State who are not familiar with that because it was, of course, it was passed at 2:30 in the morning. And it's a significant piece of legislation. Wherever you may be on this topic, or wherever you may even be on the issue of climate change or on the environment or what have you, no one can deny that the impact of this legislation is significant. And in fact, we don't even really know what the full impacts are because the legislation sets the goals, but it doesn't say how we're going to get there. That, and as they say, the devil's always in the details, how is just as important as where you're ending up. How you get there is just as important as where you're going. And that was punted, or in this legislation, in my view, it was given to a board that will meet. So the how is delegated to the Climate Action Council. Now, the goal of the legislation is to get to net zero emissions by the year 2050. Every few years, the council has to issue an implementation report, which is a plan for how we will get to these goals. The plan must include an overview of social benefits from the regulations or other measures, including reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants, diversification of energy sources, as well as other benefits to the economy, environment, and public health, which is what brings us here today. So that's why we're here, to learn about the public health impacts of wind energy. So I'm hoping that there are more of these across Western New York and across the state, because quite frankly, the legislation calls for it. And this is the only way we're going to be able to have I think, a reasonable, fact-based discussion on these projects, because if you live in a rural community, you will see more of these projects, because the goals as outlined by Governor Cuomo and in this legislation, it's going to mandate essentially more wind, more solar, more renewable energy projects to meet the demand, the energy output demand from New York State residents, because the output in many cases isn't changing, but how they have to deliver that is. Coal is going away, as we know. There's been, other determinations as far as energy policy goes. So you're going to see more of these projects. So it is my belief, and I believe Assemblyman Mike Norris's belief, and hopefully all of your belief, that these kinds of forums are both good, but that we need to have more of this public discourse and a chance to learn from people who know this information, certainly far better than Rob Ort or any elected official. There's some folks up here who have dealt with this for many, many years, and I hope that everyone in this audience learns something, maybe takes away something positive from this discussion today. Wind has obviously been a focal point of the New York State climate strategy, and we've seen more projects being proposed, as I said, across Western New York. Advocacy groups have raised concerns about public health impact of turbines, and we would like to get an understanding of what those impacts are. And I'm sure there are people here who are here today in the audience who would be directly impacted by these projects because they may live next door or live in close proximity to these turbines, and certainly their perspective is important as well as anyone else's perspective. I'm joined by a panel of experts on this topic who were recommended to me by different advocacy groups, and we'll have the opportunity for testimonials and hopefully for some questions. So I know we're going to be a little pressed for time, so what I'm going to ask is if somebody wants to ask a question as the discussion goes on, feel free. I don't know if there's slips of paper. Write those questions down, and you can hand them to the very tall gentleman in the back. The tall, lanky gentleman, he works for me, but he will collect those questions. We will submit them, and we will try to get to as many as we can. If we do not get to your question, I know many of the presenters, including myself, are going to stick around for a little bit afterward. And there may also be an opportunity to email questions to the people who are here today, and they may be able to answer those questions at a later time. So the goal is certainly to answer any question that anybody has. If we can't do it right today, we will make every effort to do that as soon as possible. I want to introduce the dais, the panel that we have here today, and then we will get into to the remarks. So as I said, I'm Senator Rob Ort. I'm joined by my colleague in the New York State Assembly, Assemblyman Mike Norris. Mike represents, the 144th District. There's a lot more in the Assembly, so I can't keep track of them all. But I know the areas he represents. He represents eastern Niagara County, so basically Lockport going east. And then he has, I guess, is it the northern portion of Erie County? Northern portion of Erie County. So he has Clarence and Newstead and Akron and that area as well. So, and he's been a colleague of mine for the past 3 years, and obviously much of his district is being impacted potentially or certainly in the future by these projects. And then we also have Dan Stapleton. He is the Niagara County Public Health Director. He is also a member of the Western New York Public Health Alliance Board of Directors, and he is the president of the New York State Association of County Health Officials. So Dan, thank you for being here. Jerry Punch, PhD, audiologist. Dr. Punch holds a PhD degree in audiology, which to me just proves you can get a PhD in anything, right? So, but no doubt he is a smarter individual than me and has been a certified audiologist for over 50 years. He has been affiliated with the Department of Communicative Sciences and Disorders at Michigan State University for the past 30 years. So to have him here is a big deal. He's obviously come from a great distance and obviously brings with him a wealth of knowledge. Although retired from his faculty position, he continues to conduct and publish audiological research at Michigan State University. He has written on the topic of wind turbine noise and human health and has often served as an expert witness on this topic. So I want to welcome Dr. Punch for being here as well. Rob Rand, member of ASA, INCE. Mr. Rand is a member of the Acoustical Society of America and a member emeritus of the Institute of Noise Control Engineers. He has over 39 years of professional experience providing environmental and technical consulting services to power generation, commerce, industry regulators, and communities. So Mr. Rand, thank you also for being here. And then last but certainly not least is Gary Abraham. A lot of people in Western New York should know Gary. He's been an environmental attorney for a number of years. Mr. Abraham is an attorney who practices environmental, municipal, and land use law throughout New York State, including practice before the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, limited to public interest cases. His current cases oppose proposals to expand major landfills and overly intrusive utility-scale wind farms. So that is Gary's background, and we will hear from him, I guess, more from a legal standpoint. And so with that, I believe this is in order, so our first presenter is going to be Dan Stapleton, Niagara County Public Health Director.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Hello, Mr. Beach. How are you today? I'm the Chief Public Health Officer for Niagara County. But today I'm representing a number of groups. Of course, I'm representing the Niagara County Board of Health. I'm also, as Senator Orden mentioned, a board member for the Western New York Public Health Alliance, which represents the 8 counties of Western New York. But I'm also serving as the president of the New York State Association of County Health Officials. I've been dealing with this issue for about 2 years. I think I got my first call was from a resident that was concerned about this issue, gravely concerned. So by no means I'm an expert in industrial wind turbines. But the first thing I do is I don't call them farms. I call them industrial wind turbines. I've met with all of my, I've met with a number of people to talk about this issue, residents of Chautauqua County, Niagara County, Genesee County, and so on, Orleans County. So I felt it was my due diligence to learn more about it. Once again, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I've learned a lot in the past 2 years since I've been dealing with this issue. And then, as part of my responsibilities as the Chief Public Health Officer for Niagara County, I had to educate my Board of Health. These are lay people, but they're also physicians and so on. So I had to talk to them about the concerns people had. There's nobody on the board that's against renewable energy. What they're against is putting projects together unless there's a very thorough process followed to make sure that this is safe. It shouldn't be incumbent upon the residents to prove that it's unsafe. It should be upon the developers to prove that it's safe. And I think that's what we're trying to get to, at least in Niagara County. So I met with my Board of Health. I talked to the members of the Western New York Public Health Alliance as a board member there, and also I talked to the 58 counties that the New York State Association represents. For most of those people, this is a new idea for them. People from Nassau County, Suffolk, they say, what are you talking about? People from Albany say, what are you talking about? Oh, I say, I'm talking about the concerns that the residents have about this type of issue. So it took a lot for me to be educated. I educated my Board of Health. And all 3 of these entities that I've talked about, the Alliance, the State Association, my Board, have all unanimously supported resolutions to say, let's look at this topic first. Let's study it thoroughly. Let's do it in the public. Let's be transparent about what we're doing and make sure we have all the information so we can make a good decision. In public health, we do that every day. We educate ourselves, learn about the issues, and learn how to do things before we do them so that they're done properly and in the right way. So that's something we've done all along. A big part of what I do is I prevent the spread of disease. That's a very important part of what I do on a daily basis, me and my staff. I promote a healthy lifestyle, and I also make sure that we protect the public from health risks and health hazards. And that last one is really why I'm here today, to talk about those types of things, to learn from our experts. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I'm learning a lot every single day on this issue. I like to say when I go to the public, I always say, if you breathe the air, or you drink the water, or you eat in a restaurant in Niagara County, then me and my staff have helped prevent your family from becoming ill. And that's really what this is about too. This is about making sure that we look at these hazards, we look at these risks, and we make sure that the public is safe, period. It's not a debate. We don't debate. we make sure that the public is safe, and then we take care of those other issues that arise. But I think we need to make sure we do that. I worry about a lot with my job. Every single day, all the time, I worry about certain things. What I'm worried about is whether a Class A body of water, Lake Ontario, gets contaminated by the fluids, the lubricants in an industrial wind turbine. I worry about that. I worry about the millions of people who use that for fresh water, not only in the United States, but also in Niagara County in the United States. I worry about chronic disease that people might have, chronic sleep disease from sleep deprivation, either not having enough sleep or not having a good quality of sleep. There's documentation that shows the impacts of those types of things on chronic disease. We deal with chronic disease every single day in the health department, without fail, chronic disease. So when we think about something that has been proven through experts saying that it can produce chronic disease, it's very important that I learn more about that. I worry about the unanticipated health impacts, the things that we don't know before we take action. Those are the things I worry about, and I'm sure you worry about that as well. We're talking about a large-scale project. And because I'm worried about these types of things, I have discussed for hours with my Board of Health. I've convinced my 58 fellow counties to support a resolution to make sure there's very thorough assessments done of health impacts and health risks before something like this is approved. I also have dealt with my West New York Public Health Alliance. Chris Schuyler is your public health director in Chautauqua County. So I've talked with her an awful lot. And because this is really important, I'm going to read a little bit about what we've said in our resolutions, because I want you to hear it directly from me. So excuse me for a minute while I read. It is imperative to fully research, assess, and evaluate any health or environmental implications that could put New York State residents and communities at risk as a result of constructing large industrial wind turbines. Local health departments are responsible under New York State public health law for protecting residents' health, so we feel it is our due diligence to support appropriate reviews and testing prior to construction of planned projects. The state must require a complete and transparent process which includes comprehensive environmental impact studies and local input. Those are things we won't debate on. They have to be part of what we expect from our government. It's what you expect from me. It's what you expect from our state representatives. And you should expect that from the New York State Department of Health as well. So that's why I'm here today. Like I said, I'm learning as much as I can. I'm going to learn from more experts today. I'll be here after the meeting if anybody wants to talk to me privately, but I'll be happy to answer questions whenever you have them. So thanks again for having me here. I appreciate it.
Well, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Carmen Crow, all the way from Ontario, Canada. Thank you very much for coming today and joining us, Carmen.
All right. All right, thanks very much for this opportunity. I've been working on the topic of wind turbines and health for about 4 years now, and what I'd like to do today is share our experiences in Ontario. A lot of my research has been international, but a lot of concentrated effort's been in Ontario. And I mentioned that the issues are international. Today, I'm going to be about 20 minutes to talk about health and property rights or perceptions of rights. I want to talk about the principles, expectations society has, and the legal implications of that, and then I'll wrap up. Now, you'll notice all my slides are referenced, and sometimes I add a little bit of emphasis to make a point. So I do this without funding, or I don't charge per diems. No money comes into my pocket, but sometimes I get travel or accommodation expenses, and I appreciate that was done here. I'm a member of the board of the Society for Wind Vigilance, and we're an international federation There's physicians, acousticians, health people, other professionals on the board, and we're all volunteer and independent. Now, our objective is to site the turbines to prevent harm. One of the things I did is to start a vigilance monitoring database in Ontario, and that's been peer-reviewed and published now, which documented the health impacts. It was an independent volunteer-funded survey, and it's now cited in the British Medical Journal, Brown County Health Unit, Nissenbaum's recent study as well. I'm either an author or co-author now of 9 peer-reviewed articles or conference papers. Recently presented 3 papers in New York's Internoise conference that was held this year. So this is the list of publications I have. I'd like to give you a few definitions because it's important when you hear the term people being annoyed, that's important to know that it's acknowledged to be an adverse health effect in itself. In everyday language, annoyance doesn't sound very important. It sounds quite trivial. However, in terms of health, it is an adverse health effect, and you'll see references to that periodically. Another important concept is that noise is defined as unwanted sound. So while sound meters will measure sound, it's people that measure noise because they will be reporting unwanted sound that they don't want to have. So they will measure noise through themselves. And we are now classifying these as new experts, and I think probably Steve Ambrose will talk about this a little bit more. The new expert concept is very important. It's been discussed for some period of time. There's been literature on this for maybe a decade. And the movement with the acousticians and those of us in health, we're saying that these new experts report events that are taking place with them. They're the receptor end. They're the ones receiving the noise, the unwanted sound, and we must take this seriously. They're the measurement tool. They're actually determining the human response, and sound becomes a risk to health when it's considered to be noise by the individuals. So we should be listening to the reports of the individuals. We have a right to health, and in 1948, World Health Organization defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. This was reaffirmed by communications I received from Health Canada and Canada. We've supported this. We continue to support this definition in Canada. That was confirmed back in July this year. Now, as well, we have the right, according to the Constitution of World Health Organization in 1948, to achieve the highest standard of health. It's one of our fundamental rights of every human being. And that was reaffirmed this year by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, what I'll mention is, I'm not sure from a legal perspective if these expectations or principles actually stand up in a court of law. And these expectations are goals, objectives, or guidelines that society would like. It's attainable through various policies, etc. But whether or not this is actually under individual countries' constitution is another matter, because that's where the law resides. Now, we know wind turbines can harm humans. And this was determined in an Ontario Environmental Review Tribunal held last year. And there was a lot of disclosure evidence, peer-reviewed articles, testimony, affidavits, and so forth. And their decision was that wind turbines can cause harm, and that the debate is now one of degree, which means setbacks. To give you a context about this particular tribunal, there were 26 witnesses, expert witnesses that were qualified by the tribunal. Testimony was under oath, and there were 16 respondents from the Ministry of Environment and also the developer. As well, internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information in Ontario. This was through the Ministry of Environment. These were internal documents. This is a quick snapshot where the investigators for noise complaints in the province had advised senior management that wind turbines using the minimum setback distances in Ontario on the sound level was likely to result in adverse effects. So we've known since a long time now, for years, that the guidelines in Ontario are not working. Now, setbacks, what does that mean? These are the smaller units, and I'm in touch with members of the public from La Gaspésie in Quebec. This kind of gives you an idea of what is meant by setbacks. They're very dense there and are surrounding the homes. I mentioned that annoyance is an adverse health effect, and Dr. Pierpont work, she documented the symptoms, and I think we know them well. There are things like sleep disturbance, headache, tinnitus, vertigo, the heart problems, and concentration issues. And her research was an internationally scoped research, Canada, U.S. She researched someone in Ireland, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Now, those symptoms have been acknowledged through, for example, Dr. Leventhal, in testimony that he gave at the Environmental Review Tribunal, he reaffirmed that he was happy to accept the symptoms because what Dr. Pierpont described were the effects of annoyance. So remember, annoyance is an adverse health effect. And as well, the American and Canadian Wind Industry Association sponsored report also acknowledged Dr. Pierpont's symptoms and determined they were the well-known effects of exposure to noise. And finally, Dr. Leventhal testified in Australia and also determined or affirmed wind turbine syndrome is the result of stress from annoyance. So this is a very important distinction that Dr. Pierpont's work around the symptoms are accepted, they're acknowledged. However, the debate is around the mechanism she's proposing, the mechanism of action. And there's more research required because there's a lot of possible mechanisms available, and she herself says we have to do more work on the mechanism. Now, the Brown County Board of Health, they think there's a problem, and I think some of you know about this. They've petitioned the state to get emergency financial relocation money for people that have had to leave their homes or should be leaving their homes. We have the same situation in Ontario. Many have abandoned their homes or should, but haven't got enough resources. And I won't speak too much about your area because I think Steve Ambrose is going to talk about that, but your public health unit is looking to initiate health assessment. I noted the other day, Kingston, the health board there is looking at legal options for turbine complaints as well. And there's legal activity happening in Ontario as well. Another important reference about how wind turbines can harm humans, this is a report of a consultant in Ontario that was hired by the Ministry of Environment, and it was released last year. And that report, the consultant determined that the receptor distances in Ontario and the sound levels that we model for, it's expected to result in a non-trivial percentage of people highly annoyed. And if you recall, annoyance is an adverse health effect, and it's associated with stress. I think we're all familiar with Dr. Nissenbaum's work, where he's done a controlled physician-designed study. It's an epidemiology study, and he determined as well there was a potential to harm human health. So we know this. One last item to put things in context is around the indirect impacts, because in Ontario, our Chief Medical Officer of Health's report said even though there were symptoms described and reported, the evidence didn't demonstrate a direct link. The key word here is direct. World Health has what we call a noise exposure schema. These are also always very handy for decision trees and so forth in health. And you'll notice where the blue arrow or circle is, high noise exposure takes you down a direct pathway, where usually it's hearing loss or tissue damage that can occur, and it's usually in large factories where you need noise protection and so forth. However, the indirect pathway is very important in health, and you'll notice noise levels for that, or sound levels for that, are moderate levels, and that's where we see the symptoms, the cluster and bundle of symptoms of sleep problems, annoyance, cognitive stress indicators. Both pathways, though, take you down to cardiovascular diseases. The survey I did in Ontario, we had, as I mentioned, we had about a third of the people reporting in having cardiac issues, and these were frequently under investigation by their doctor. Now, during the Environmental Review Tribunal we held, and the lead author of this particular report, under oath, stated that she did agree with the World Health noise schema. She also stated they only looked at direct links. So that means the significance of the report saying there's no direct links, they actually missed half of the important side, the indirect pathway. The decision of the tribunal said they had some concern that only the direct pathway was looked at, and there wasn't consideration of the indirect. They also stated in their decision, serious harm to human health includes the indirect pathway. In other words, people exposed to noise and developing related symptoms, and that's exactly the bundle of symptoms that we see described. Of interest, as I mentioned, there's some legal actions happening in Ontario, and one of the lawyers there has launched legal action to get our medical officer of health to testify on the stand, and it's been a bit of back and forth where she has appealed it. Recently, this is part of the decision that her appeal didn't work so far. We don't know. There might be more. You know how this works, can go back and forth for a while. But at the moment, it looks like she will be having to testify to defend her report. Now, I'd like to talk about social economic issues, and I'm only going to focus on property at this point. But there's a huge number of economic issues that I think we're familiar with. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says we have the right to own property, and no one should be arbitrarily deprived of that. So we're not talking about someone taking your property. What we're really talking about is inhibiting or reducing your property value. And this could be serious because you could work for many years, and then if you lose a certain percentage of property value, go from net worth to negative worth. In Denmark, they're looking at that, where if you erect a turbine, there's a duty to pay compensation for the value of the property. I'll talk quickly. I know there's going to be another presentation on property value, but this is Wolfe Island in Ontario, and you can see the density and the closeness to the community of the turbines. what's been interesting there, since 2010, ads have been appearing with relationship to properties and wind turbines. So, for example, I excerpted from that big ad that this was waterfront lots, and back in 2010, they addressed it, Will Filan, that you couldn't hear or see turbines from the lots. So there was influence about ownership and property ownership, or people wanting to buy or sell. As well, in 11, Ontario has new disclosure for selling property. So 2 of the questions have to do with contamination and maybe whether or not there's waste dumps. And I think those of you that sometimes have sold or bought property, you see these disclosures. Well, in Ontario, there's a requirement now to declare if wind turbines are planned in the area. The legal counsel of the Environmental Review Tribunal, this was the Ministry of Environment counsel, she stated what impact makes people sick is the impact of property values because they get less money for their property. So this was during one of the motions where it wasn't, people were expressing illness because they lost value for property, and it was due to annoyance. So we have a case study, and I think this might be coming up later, but we've looked, one of the appraisers found property value difference up to 58%, as low as 26 or 23, with an average loss in the study that he did around 38%. So that can really push you, it takes a long time to recover that. Another social economic issue that I think is critical is the lengthy legal battles, the cost and the expense. Not in monetary only, but those cases cost a lot of money, but also in the dedication of time and effort and the stress that causes. This is a case, and some of you may be familiar, from England. It took 5 years. So I'd like to just quickly focus now. We know harm, we know property values is happening, issues are happening, and where does that take us? Well, in Ontario, we have a Green Energy Act, and this is something that I think I'm noticing the Green Energy Act philosophy is starting to be utilized in other jurisdictions. So we have a law now that dictates a number of principles. One of the things that struck me when this came out in 2009 is to remove barriers. And where are barriers? Environment is a barrier, and so forth. So that's a critical element of the Green Energy Act. Article 8 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights says that we're supposed to have an effective remedy of national tribunals if any of the perception or if our fundamental rights have been violated by constitution or law. Now, that's where the gap is. I'm not a lawyer, so we need lawyers to determine whether these declarations and these articles and conventions stand up in law or not. But philosophically, that's our expectation. In Ontario, the former Minister of Energy said, we passed a law, and the law doesn't create an opportunity for municipalities to resist the project. So they're imposed. Municipalities, I think there's over 80 in Ontario who have expressed concern in some manner, and the law overrides. It's policy or law over human health. I want to raise an issue about ethics because I've worked in health for many years, and we have a gap between consenting and non-consenting individuals. Right now, typically, at least in Ontario, agreements state if you are going to host turbines on your property, that the rent you're given is compensation for nuisance noise, AM interference, so on, shadow flicker, and other inconveniences. So there is an agreement signed to consent to these conditions. However, non-consenting adults who are exposed probably to the same level of noise, maybe the same distances, don't have the opportunity to consent to those issues. And this is maybe a new or a thoughtful ethics issue that we have to start looking at, because the non-consenting adults, where there's expectation of harm to happen, we know this already, are researched. So it's something that I think is going to need some ethicists look. An author that I know very well, he said in his peer-reviewed article, state actions that don't enjoy the active consent of people, especially if your health is adversely affected, is fundamentally suspect. In other words, he's expressing concern about what I'm raising. We have a gap between our approval process and how we can appeal it. In our approval, the legal test or the approval is based on an adverse effect. You'll see the list, also loss of enjoyment of property. However, when we have the right of appeal, but the right of appeal is that we must prove serious harm will occur in that project as approved. And this will be serious harm to human health or serious irreversible to plant life. Now, serious harm to human health, the burden of proof is a very high threshold in compared to having to show an adverse effect. I worked in adverse effect for 15 years, and this burden of proof is extremely high. So that there's two standards. One was the approval, and one was the appeal. Consequences. I know these people. They testified back in 2009. They were billeted for months. In fact, after this testimony, one family was over a year billeted in hotels, motels, so forth. They couldn't do any family gatherings anymore. Young children were being affected, and the stress was very high. Some of the families said, no, we won't allow our relatives here. It was very difficult. And they were already in 2009, after exposure for 2 years, demonstrating long-term effects. One of the things I'm concerned about is long-term surveillance. We've got a snapshot in time from the vigilance survey we did, but no follow-up on what's happened since then to these people. Now, I got permission from them. 5 families. Not all of them are here. One was a pregnant woman taking the shot, and she was banned from the house. And she's the one who had the little daughter. So you can see the demographics ranges from very young and more elderly people. And these are real people. They're all out of their homes. They reached financial settlement with the developer, and they still grieve. They didn't really want to have to leave, but they did on so forth. It's very sensitive. I will mention 2 of them have passed on since this picture. Another issue in the house, low-frequency noise, is worse inside than outside. 5 were shut down. I know this woman very, very well, this family. A community-funded noise study, developer noise study, and a freedom of information from the from the ministry's people said, yeah, they've got low-frequency noise in the house. They can't live in there. 5 were shut down at night, and they still preferred to sleep in a tent outside. They got also a financial arrangement and don't speak about it. So to wrap up, I found in my research and what I did on the social justice article that these adverse effects, because they're not acknowledged, there's no remedy, no remedial action that can take place, and we're really looking at loss of fairness and social justice. Now, is that going to stand up in the court of law other than trying to get a financial arrangement through litigation? One of the authors that published a discussion about public health ethics and the challenges of wind turbines in Ontario, he noted that, and I'll read this, administrative law systems that stray from the principles of natural justice held to underlie them are also suspect because such departures are in conflict with the rule of law. And that's the key. Is there rule of law that can be used versus the principles and the aspirations that we, as members of society, we want health protection, we want to be looked after. So I leave it at that, and I really appreciate all your attention, and thank you for the invitation here.